I want people to know what happens to a person when anybody, a school board or the media, social media, comes down like a boot on top of somebody and squashes them. And in my case, when the boot lifted off, there were 100 more of me. I was watching the board for a while. I wasn't paying attention to what was going on in the school board. I was just focused on my own students in my classroom. The messages from the Ed Center, from the Equity Department, they were catching my attention. So I started reading. I started clicking on their links. Before I actually spoke at the school board meeting, I had sent letters to all the way up the chain expressing my concerns. I'd done the right thing to, use the chain of command. But they all said the same thing. Basically, everybody was just afraid, I think, of the topic. And they just pointed to human rights codes and they didn't want to have a nuanced discussion. I was concerned because I felt like their rhetoric coming from the school board was creating divisions and pitting groups against each other. And so I was actually going to go talk about that. And I actually had to remove that part of my whole delegation. Maybe someday I'll be back to do that one. Because in the meantime, the calling the library thing came up. And the record reporter put this message out, and she was questioning, why is it that you're calling the library and the teachers' collections, which have never been called before, and you're not really explaining why, what's your criteria? So then I thought, all right, let's do that delegation. So I started to dig down into why are you calling teachers' collections? Are you actually going to come into our classrooms and take our books out that we read to kids, and why? Shouldn't you be explaining why? What's the philosophy behind it? So that was my point. What's your philosophy? What's your underlying philosophy where you're going to take Dr. Seuss out of the libraries and then you're going to put other books in? So in the meantime, we got this big list that was November of Transgender Day Awareness resources. In the record article, one of the leaders, he had said that they're really happy about the new diverse books that they're putting into the library. So I thought, well, let's take a look at the new diverse books. So I started clicking through and I was like, what? And then I went and got a couple of the books and I started reading them and I thought, what? So here you are taking out Dr. Seuss and you're putting in these books that are going to make kids question, am I a boy or a girl? I was like, these are inappropriate materials for young children. There is such a thing as age appropriate. And it's interesting that term is being characterized as bigoted. If you actually look at what they did with that term, age inappropriate, movies are characterized as certain age groups are appropriate. There's such a thing as general and restricted. That is considering age appropriateness. So it's always been a good thing, to think about what's age appropriate for kids. But all these terms are being mischaracterized, demonized in a sense. If you say the word age appropriate, you're a bigot. If you look at something like the April meeting, Trustee Watson was trying to bring forward a motion to say, well, okay, let's make sure that the books in the school aligned with the ministry curriculum for health, so that young children aren't seeing things that you're not supposed to see till you're in grade 6, right? That makes sense. In that meeting, this whole word age appropriateness got completely mischaracterized and demonized, and the board voted it down. They voted it down to protect kids from materials that are meant for older children with sexual material in them. So that's really hard to understand. This whole word harmful was being used. That age appropriateness is harmful. We see our blind spots when we have diverse opinions at the table. That is completely missing in the school boards right now. What happened was I spoke that night. I was cut off after 4 minutes. I thought, oh, wow, that's surprising. And then I went to bed and woke up in the morning and then I got a phone call from HR. Now I was about to return to school after a big long lockdown again and we were going to see the kids and everybody was excited. I was excited. I had this call from HR that I had to stay home and that I was being investigated and that I was not to speak to my students or go talk to my colleagues or anything, completely isolated. It just kept ramping up. I thought, okay, this has got to be over soon, right? No, but every day I woke up that week, more radio interviews, more TV things, I was getting calls and emails from reporters. And the whole thing started just ballooning. Every day it got bigger and bigger. I was like, when is it going to stop? And people were saying to me, Carolyn, you got to say something. You got to get out there. You got to say something. And well, I was afraid to say anything because I had spent all those hours making this exactly what I thought perfect, speech. And I wasn't even allowed to say that. So if I say something off the cuff, then what's going to happen? And I think it speaks to just how toxic our culture is right now around talking at all. Like, people are terrified to talk, and they're especially terrified about this topic. Because we're not talking about it, a lot of things are going on right now that are not okay. We decided we wanted control over the narrative and my message, so we filmed it in my sunroom in my house. We filmed that on the Friday morning that week, and then the whole thing went viral. By the afternoon, it was going viral because the school board had made me into such a monster that people were really interested to hear what the monster had to say. While they're defaming me publicly, people are interested. They're like, well, what'd she say? What's this horrible person saying? The school board also sent out emails to all the teachers and all the parents in the community that were apologizing for the transphobic person that made these comments. So some of them went and looked for it, and it was on Rumble. Somebody had put it on Rumble, and people found it. They were watching it, and they were saying, that's all she said, and you said that, you did that, and it started a movement. Now, I didn't know that because I was basically recovering from the abusive power that was coming down on me. And that abusive power was so harmful. I want people to know what happens to a person when anybody, a school board or the media, social media, comes down like a boot on top of somebody and squashes them. And in my case, when the boot lifted off, there were 100 more of me. It'd actually be hard for me to tell what the Justice Center funding my lawyers means to me, because it's kind of like it was the hardest thing in my life. And I felt under a boot of the government. And it was the Justice Center funding my lawyers that caused the school boards and other government institutions to recognize that they must uphold the rights of Canadians to speak. They must uphold constitutional freedoms. What could be more important than supporting the freedom of Canadians? I would just ask people to fund the Justice Center, to donate to them. It's a worthy cause. They're there for you if this happens to you.